Alright, folks, welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、おかえりなさい。今日は72日目です。It's day 72. Got a few reviews yesterday. Got a few reviews today. Yesterday, we looked at the Kaiju Gator thing, or Kaijugation thing. Had a lot to say about it. It's very useful because it does group associations with things. So I really like that. It's definitely does not overlap with the other practice materials. I really look forward to them continuing to expand different types of input and output, because these are so far what I've done so far, which isn't very much. Most of these are wonderfully complementary to each other. So like the long story short about learning, right? Learning in general is that, for me personally, learning is very much a holistic thing, as opposed to some sort of specialization. I call it specializing in generalization, but I feel that the properties of learning is often overrepresented by optimization. And to me, to balance that, I often think of learning as a concept of holistics, not a concept of specialization. So the more narrow you are at, and the more hyper objective you are at optimizing your input and output when it comes to learning something, like for example Japanese, the context is what's narrow, right? The context, the content itself is what is considered as specialized. The learning process itself is, in my opinion, is rarely considered the thing to be specialized in. So whenever I talk about things like engaging in new tools, which this is part of Bunpro, all these tools are part of Bunpro, looking at features is often looking at it holistically, like the bigger picture, right? You have supplementary and complementary methodologies, and I did my bit, and I'm kind of refining my bit about the idea of responding and correcting with regards to curation, analytics and curation, and then ultimately creation, which is the tiers that I would say where learning happens, like the completion of learning happens. When one is at the bottom stage of memorizing and recognizing things, that's eliciting a response and correct. That is very surface level. And surface level is great for accomplishing tasks efficiently and optimized. It rarely goes beyond the specialization of the content itself when there's no holistic understanding of things. So in this way, it was a wonderful little side quest, if you will. We're still gonna continue to investigate these things where I can have a purpose. I have an idea of how I'm going to use some of these things in like a way to mix it up a little bit. Today it looks like we have 50, so we're trying to fit in some practice things for the first cycle, because there will be a month or 2 months of practice before we enter the next like cluster. This is what I often mean by there's an overrepresentation on efficiency. In my opinion, the tough part about the latter part of the journey, which is dealing with output, like there's this very common notion going around that output means less than input, right? And when it comes to the novelty of the information, yes, there's a higher volume of input that is involved in that's compared to output. But the thing you're going to be doing for a large majority of your life is the output, not the input, right? Novelty comes in my opinion. So like, I'm not trying to deflate the importance of input, but more so to complete the picture. The picture is that input has a low time of exposure in order to gain its value, or like its perceived value by people. Like, you get more information, it's novel information, it keeps coming in, it feels good. I think that's the short-term game, despite most people thinking the input part is the long-term game. It is the completion of the input, which involves output, that is a long game. The long game is eventually you want to say, do I remember this? Can I produce this? Can I create this? So while it seems like that part you're learning less, quote unquote learning less, because learning deals with the acquisition of new knowledge, that's fair, right? If you think of input as the acquisition of new knowledge is the reason behind learning, that's fair. Learning to me requires that you complete the whole thing. You go from input to output, and then you learn the thing is when you maintain the output or various outputs to keep that information with you. That then there is opportunity for comprehension. If you learn something by input and you do not output or use it in any way in which it is retained, there is no opportunity for comprehension. Comprehension is when that thing becomes a part of you. It becomes solidified in a manner that it is part of your regular use. So anytime someone, like, I can't tell you how many times someone comes up to me and say like, well, you're not learning anything, you're just practicing. And I'm like, that's part of learning. If you do not practice, if you do not give yourself sufficient ways of practicing, and we're not talking about practicing as in, which is what I mentioned yesterday, about doing the same thing over and over again. That is very different from practicing in the way of using the knowledge. When you're practicing how you learned it initially, that's practicing the input stimulus. You're not practicing any form of output that is part of the holistic nature of output. Like you creating a sentence, you reading it in a manga, you reading, you seeing it and hearing it from someone. Those are different forms of input that elicits an output. They're tied together. They're not separate things, at least in my opinion. And I've grown wary of how overrepresented that you can separate the two things as though like it's not part of the entire picture, right? Ultimately, all of the things that culminate in the delay gratification is output. So without that, and trivializing output is like suggesting that once you learn it, you never have to maintain it. You never have to do anything. It's permanently with you. And I assure you that is one of the basic human conditions that seem to be overlooked nowadays on the internet. It's crazy how perspectives, like this particular perspective is very difficult for me to communicate, where when someone says, I don't get it, why do I have to try hard and do the same things all the time in order to remember something? It's like, well, if you don't remember it and you're constantly doing the same thing, then it's not sufficient to remember it. But the thing is, why does that not make sense to someone? It's because they favor input. They don't understand the results of their output. Like the output generates new input. So if you're going around and you're saying, I've already done this, I've already input this 100 times in this way and I still can't remember it. Is there no, like, it's crazy. Like to me, it's a little bit disappointing when I would tell, so what did you do differently? Like, what did your output tell you about your current input? At the most basic fundamental level, it should tell you that whatever you're inputting is not working, right? However, that's where it ends, because then they would address the nature of the input. without adjusting or concerning how it relates to the output, right? It's always like, oh, it must be the methodology that's incorrect. Like, okay, well, yeah, it could be that. It could help you, if you input something else, it could help you retain, like, learn the thing. And then they go on and say like, oh, okay, now I learned the thing. 3 months later, it's like, I don't remember it anymore. It's like, yes, because you haven't been outputting any of it. You do not maintain it. Output is the most consistent, in my opinion. I know like it's a general category, but consistently creating different sources of output is a way to naturally retain something that you learned. But learning to me includes the retention of the thing. When you forget something, it is unlearned, as in you can lose your learning, the things you learned, right? And that's kind of where, at least I'm using the Gen Z term, the feeling. When you forget something, it feels like you have unlearned something, like that thing no longer has value anymore. And that's kind of how I feel when someone says like, oh yeah, I believe in this, like a ritualistic behavior. I believe in input only. And then, 6 months down the line, it's like, oh man, this is so unrewarding. It's like, well, yeah, I know. That's what you sign up for. Right? That's the idea. When you input only, you signed up for that. Whether you, in my opinion, recognize that holistically, it takes holistics in order to understand the bigger picture, not specialized narrow focus. So I think for me, practice, this like, here's a testament, right? You have, whenever I think about input and content, when you think about content, in my opinion, when it comes to learning, content is often refined and specialized. I have no qualms with that. When someone says, oh, what is the most efficient way to get exposure to kanji? Stare at the kanji character dictionary. It would be the highest rate of exposure to you. And then when you practice, that list is like 4 times longer. Or because anything downstream of the original exposure is a form of retention. So whenever someone tells me like, oh, I learned the fastest with this method, like, good for you. How are you maintaining it? By using the same input method to retain the output. I'm like, good luck with that, because that's going to be the only framework you're going to ever be able to use to retain that information. And that means that it will, to me personally, right, not to others, but to me, if I was constantly doing the same thing that I learned to use the information, like, to that to me screams like I'm never using the information. I'm only doing the thing to iterate, like, to not even iterate, to just refresh it, to never use it. So I think there is something that does well, and it, you have to balance it. But when it comes to even Duolingo and other certain apps that say you can use it right away, you can try to use it and balance learning, that's kind of how I like this SRS thing too, where there is a learning and there's an output process. However, what I feel takes a lot of extra, like, boost Bunpro's value is that they are diversifying their output. Now, a lot of times when someone says, oh, the most important thing is the content, and my thought is, yeah, the content is very important. Is it the most important thing? I'm not entirely sure. It depends on your emotional stability, because if the most important thing is content, then eventually that content will exceed your ability to retain it. So when you try to consume new content, your steady state content that you have is rolling over while you're taking in new content. So if you're thinking about progress, like a person's learning capacity and whatnot, it actually spins in place. you don't actually get any smarter or like quote unquote smarter or more aptitude. You're losing information at the rate you're gaining information. So there's no learning, there's no comprehension involved. You're spinning the cycle. So when you gain 50 words, you lose 50 words. You know, like 50 words disappear. So you're learning like, oh yeah, you finally reached 2000 kanji, but you only retained the last 200 because that was your max rotation. You did not use any way to retain the others. Like this, in my opinion, is the bare minimum that you can do. This is what happens when you optimize output, which to the credit of Bunpro's team, they offer many different ways to practice, which is really awesome. So that's what I wanted to highlight from yesterday. It's awesome that they are continuing to look at different things. Now, here's the funny bit. This is not mandatory. This is voluntary, right? You get to choose to do this. But in Duolingo, it is mandatory, right? Duolingo has no filters, no nothing. You have to do all their exercises. If you have to translate one way, you have to translate the other way. If you have to mix and match, like they have you do all of it mandatorily. And why is that important? Because regardless of how you want to remember it, you're going to remember it whatever Duolingo suggests because you have all those inputs. Now, obviously, the biggest criticism is Duolingo's accuracy with their portrayal of their content, which is independent of its retention rate. Retention of what Duolingo gets you to do is very excellent because they get you to do those input. And this might be a little bit victim blaming, but when you use shortcuts, you know, like Duolingo, it's easy, so people game the system, right? They game it instead of like taking in the information. This can be done here too. You can game the system, like click on cram and then have a dictionary on the left side and just match up all the answers. Then that's a shortcut. You'll get it done very quickly, but you won't learn anything or retain anything for that matter, because you have something else retaining it for you. So all of these practice things still are voluntary, like despite Duolingo being mandatory. The reason why Duolingo continues to diversify on output is because that does increase engagement, and it also increases the different methods you can output. Now, whether the way they output is meaningful or not, that's up to criticism, right? Like other people say, well, that's an unnatural way to output these things. It's like, I agree. There's no way, like these are artificial ways to not be the same, right? The only way you'll get better at conversation is literally doing conversation. But hear me out. If you can understand that logic, right, where like a lot of hardcore learners would go around and say, oh yeah, Duolingo doesn't help you with conversation. I know it doesn't. You don't have conversations in Duolingo. If you have that logic, then tell me, why do you think that there are efficient ways and optimized ways to learning when you need to output them anyways? So you have to do those things as well. So like if you're terrible at conjugation, you got to conjugate, whether that's natural or not, right? So the retention and the execution of the things is disproportionate to the amount of content. It's, to me, I think that's when the internet and hyper optimizing your process creates gaps, or not necessarily gaps. It lacks redundancy. It lacks redundancy necessary to retain the information. So now I'm emphasizing this point because I'm no longer in that state of mind where I'm lacking foundations. When you're in the intermediate stage, which I'm not even there where I left off in Bunpro yet, when you're in the intermediate stage, it's not the address for the content, it's the address, in my opinion, for the output. The overemphasis on input really casts a wide shadow on the idea that when you learn something, there are so many ways to use that information. And right now, the impression I get is there's only the correct way or the best way to do something. And when it doesn't fit those best ways and correct ways, it becomes emotional, gaslighting, and projecting most of the time. Like, oh, I wish, like, for example, in communication skills, oh, why can't everyone just speak the same language? Or why can't everyone just mean the same thing when I say the same thing? Life would be so much easier if everyone was always on the same page. Like, yeah, that's what happens when you spend your whole time thinking that you're inputting and learning the ideal way of doing something, and you hope that everyone always behaves that way, or anything you ever do always behaves ideally. And that, to me, is why there is a overrepresentation of like optimizing your learning. I feel it's kind of oxymoronic to me to think that to optimize learning is to restrict your capacity to learn. And that's like, I think that might be an unintended consequence of when someone says sufficiency, right? Sufficiency is not the same as optimal. Optimizing deals with the idea of narrowing people's choices because there are less optimal things. Sufficiency is a collective that reaches, that can accomplish a task whether it is optimal or not. And I think the internet has blown this out of the proportion, at least the internet community, whatever they are, the various communities, because most things on the internet tends to view things with optimization in mind. Optimizing learning, I mean, I don't know how Bunpro advertised their products, or Wanikani for that matter, and Hanzahiro, but the first question people always ask is it efficient? And the question I ask myself is it sufficient? Right? Two different words. It's kind of ironic because, or it's a little bit ironic because the people who keep championing efficiency and optimal learning quote a lot of articles, a lot of theories, a lot of concepts that are arguing for sufficiency, not optimization or efficiency. They're arguing for sufficiency. And ironically here, since we're talking about language learning, right? You're learning Japanese or Chinese or whatever you're learning out there. It is very ironic that the weakest and misuse of language came from reading in English, a language that most of those people who are arguing and like projecting and gaslighting people took for granted. Sufficiency is not the same as efficiency. You can go and try to optimize and look for efficient, efficacious, impactful, all these words, effectiveness for your words, but it's not the same as sufficiency. Sufficiency means that it can work. It is able to work, not it is the best, and that you should optimize it. That's not the, that's not the intent, at least in my opinion. Crazy. That's my reflection upon what I was digressing yesterday, where someone's gonna ask, well, is this a waste of time? It's like, is doing any of this a waste of time? And the way to get that into that mindset is the idea that you're sitting there, you're thinking, there's only one way to do something, the best way. How can I find the best way to do something? How can I find the best way to enjoy a movie? The best way to prep garlic noodles? The best way to eat pasta? The best way to eat sushi, right? That's the internet. That's NetSpeak right there. Every single time, I feel like I sound like a broken record, which it's probably very appropriate, largely because the more overrepresented a line of thinking is, the more I am going to balance it out with a counterexample. The counterexample is holistics somehow got lost in translation. Sufficiency is built upon holistics. Like if you do 10 different things, is it sufficient when you put it together that it works? It works good enough, right? It is sufficient to achieve the goal. And in optimizing, breaks down holistics. It takes it so that it sweeps aside anything that is, you could say, superfluous or redundant. That's assuming they are redundant. In language learning, hooey. It's shocking when I have the privilege to see people's like study habits and learning habits, and then ask them, okay, so what are you getting from these things? And it would be like 90% enriched for one way of thinking. Like everything bottlenecks into one like dominant approach. And so it can still work, right? It will likely work, actually. And the idea to make it work is to make sure that it accommodates sufficient things of everything else. So like if you have one dominant strategy, the strategy will come with pros and cons, right? There are very few things in the world that is all win all the time. So you look at the pros and cons and you hope that all the cons are sufficient. They do not create a bottleneck for your method. And I've seen a couple people's workflow so far, and my first thought is, are there any redundancies or contingency plans or complementary things? Because oftentimes you put all your eggs in one basket. It is a very precarious life to always having to worry about everything being in one place. When it fails, you lose all your eggs, and then you go make a new basket, and you can choose to repeat that. I rarely ever put all my eggs in one basket. I can try to put most of my eggs in the most secure basket, but I'm working up and staggering a bunch of other baskets here. Alright, let's get into our vocabulary. We got 50 today. It's a short one today. Oh, not too bad.
今は正月なので一緒にダラダラしませんか?
Oh, that's a 50-50. What?
両親から出産祝いをもらいました。
Sorry, I was thinking of accepting in as opposed to receiving. That's a 50-50. How can we say there in a more general way?
師匠、そちらのお嬢さんのマナーは非常にいいです。
大人、君は何年生？子供。中学2年生です。
あなたの隣にある調味料を取ってください。
調味料。Oh, condiments.
夫が妻に、君がもうホテルを予約しただろ
う。僕は標準語より方言の方が好きです。
その青いバッグは誰のものですか
？2歳の息子はテレビのスイッチを押したいといつも言う。
That quote threw me off so hard. Oh, whoops.
私は
Forgot that
人が
E.
大勢いる場所が嫌いだ。
What? Wait. Obstetrician? Is that not? Oh. That's not it. Oh no! Wait. I think it's... Oh no. Hang on. Okay. It's definitely... like birth, right? Sun... What's the end? Hmm. Uh... Could be Shah. Oh, maybe it's... That's too short. Oh no, it's Sanse Jean Sanse Jean instead of women, right? So no, it's not. It's Sanfujin. Sanfujinka.
生理が2週間も遅れているので、明日は産婦人科に行くつもりだ。
Oh, actually, it's... Oh no, Sanfujinka. So I went with birth life as opposed to pregnant woman human studies or like person. 50-50. Okay.
誰かこの建物についての噂を知っていますか？
50-50.
学校の給食より両親が作る弁当の方が美味しい。
スーパーでアボカドを買う。
あなたが好きな男の子は誰ですか？
That could be a 50-50. It is light there though.
係員、非常時の出口はこちらです。
上司。上司。
この定期券はいくらですか？
私はイタリアで美味しいハムとチーズを食べたい。
コンセントを抜く。
この辺りにはお金持ちの人の家がたくさんあります。
I mean, that is in polite. It's a polite phrase, so that could not be a 50-50. This is all sorts of. This is like 33%. What do we have? We have Rina and Haruko. Haruka. Haruka and Rina are talking to each other. Maybe it's
はるか。音楽の授業が好き？リナ。嫌い。
it's a bit informal. It's still like a 30-60 since it's informal or casual. And then there's really, yeah, this is still 50-50. It's no longer a 50-50 because we already had the other
お
problem.
正月なので子供にお年玉をあげよう。
It is a sentence that's coming from an adult, so that's the thing, but adults could speak in casual. There's no reason to believe it's not casual. It's 50-50.
手を合わせてごちそうさまでしたという。
The deshita gives it away. It would be, and like I guess you would most likely say gochiso sama deshita instead of gochiso in that case when you're quoting something. There's a na there, so we
ダ
could
ンスの
hit
先
that.
生、踊りが下手な人はもっと練習をした方がいいよ。
I think this is like a 50-50. I'm gonna go with Mama.
ななみ。スキーやスノーボードが好き？たく。まあまあ。
Maybe this is more of a foreigner thing. When you go into like a restaurant and someone will say, "Do you like something?" or "Do you want something?" Sometimes they will respond with "skoshi," right? "Skoshi." So, in this case, that's where I meant by it could be a 50-50. Where you could say, "skoshi," right? As opposed to "mama." But I think because I've heard this a couple times already, it felt more likely that it would be mama. Anyways, that's kind of why I said that's a this is a 50-50, but okay, there is one thing that I'm doing to game Bunpro in a way, but the thing is I already know the two responses. For example, they automatically switch between, if I type da, it could come out in katakana or hiragana, right? So depending on, a lot of times the 50-50 is between the katakana and the hiragana, like the kanji, right? So I usually I type something and I immediately reflexively change it if it is the 50-50. However, in order to not game Bunpro, by cutting shortcuts for myself, I think of both of the possibilities, and then I test whether they're looking for the loan word, or so in this case it's otearai, right? Otearai is part of the N5 group, and then toire is the other one. So immediately when I typed O, it didn't come out as katakana, so it's referring to otearai. That's what I do
息
a
子が
lot.
父に怖いのでお手洗いまでついてきてください。
And it's not really a big deal to me. I actually think I'm doing more work, and if I do more work and I can do it very quickly, that also means I retain those two words. And that's kind of one of the big deals to me. Whenever someone says like, oh yeah, but I only want to know the right answer, and I'm like, well, you can know the right answer and you can also know other like other things related to it. So when you know something, all the other things should be attached to it. Otearai and toire should be attached to each other, regardless if the right answer here is otearai or toire, right? So that's the one thing that I have a particular, if I had a particular disappointment that happens a lot, is how quickly people groom information because they only want to use the least amount of effort to understand something. And I think over time, I find myself constantly telling them, like, you don't know if it has no value right now. You don't know if these things are not important. If you're going to do them and you can do them, what happens when you forget them and you find out that you can't know what you have forgotten? So a lot of times when someone says, oh yeah, like I've said this myself before, it's like, oh, this is only in kana. Like, why means otearai is not always in, like, this is not the example, but say something like kudasai, right? If you only seen kudasai in kana for a very long time and you're saying, oh, most people write it with the kana instead of using this, the idea is you're trying to make it easier on yourself by not remembering certain things. You're streamlining the things. So when it comes up, you don't even know if that's part of the difficulty that you're having. Because you're trying to do more, not less. And I feel like when it comes to learning and education has been so stigmatized. Like, people say like, oh, I love learning. And then the first thing they do is spend 50 to 60% of their time optimizing how little they can learn. Like, that's kind of not the goal of learning. The learning part is how much you can learn at any time. I get time, right? So I'm okay with people who say, oh, I don't have enough time to learn all of this. That's fine. That's great. When I hear, oh, that's not necessary information, or that information is not important, that's someone who has a lot of time. They just or have enough time. They just simply think that it's no longer important to remember those things. So it's like two different things, right? There are people who want to remember less because learning is a chore. They want the reward of knowing just the things they need to know, so they don't like learning. And then there are people who love learning, but they don't have enough time to learn everything. So they're trying to look for efficient ways. And the efficient ways mean that those people understand that they won't learn everything. As in, like, they won't learn more. They will actually learn less because they have less time to learn. So for example, if you always think otearai is the way to ask for the bathroom in public, then otearai is the thing you're going to remember. And then when someone says, toire wa doko desu ka? And it's like, toire? Oh, otearai. Otearai kochira, right? Kochira wa kochira. The idea is that that person, they'll respond and they'll be weird and they'll be awkward, and you can be weird and you can be awkward. That's perfectly all right. But if someone else just sits there and stares blankly, that's the Gen Z stare, in my opinion. That's what happens when you get the Gen Z stare. When something happens and it's outside of their peripheral interest. And the idea is there's no holistics. Like you are built, specialized to do something so refined that the moment it goes outside, the first habit they will, in my opinion, if you want a litmus test for yourself, the first habit you're going to do is you're going to correct the other person. As opposed to explaining, talking about why, and being able to, you know, create a lasting impression on the other person. The first thing that you'll do is you'll correct them, because that's what we say, that's what I say, that's the correct way to say things. And to me, there's no mutual learning involved in both directions. You gave an answer with no explainer at all. And if you're wondering, well, you can still explain it, I doubt it. I very highly doubt you'll be able to explain it to the other person in a way that it contextualizes why they use the phrase toire instead of otearai, or both. Like, your assumption is that if they use toire, they don't know what otearai is, but that's not true. You wouldn't know that because you've already specialized in hyper focus yourself to one thing. And again, I'm not talking about native Japanese speakers or anything like that, because native Japanese speakers, despite if they know something is natural or not, they may also know what is unnatural and what foreigners would say because they have the experience to do so. We're talking more about people who are learning, right? The people who learn, they typically, you have the hyper optimized people who only learn with the least amount of effort they can possibly wield, because they either don't care enough or don't care to spend the time to do so. And then the ones that obviously I also have privilege to meet, I think is far less anecdotally speaking, are people who want to learn so much, and they want to learn all the permutations and all the interesting things, but they don't have enough time for it. So then they look for efficient ways to learn. Like when someone says it's a waste of time, usually waste is negative. And that's not what the impression I get from someone who simply thinks, oh yeah, that's a funny and unnatural way of saying it. But they know that is a funny and unnatural way of saying it. They're not saying it's a waste of time, as in like, oh yeah, you just wasted your time, because no one ever remembers that. That is the difference. And here too, I'm revealing some of my things because personally, my approach to these type of things and my response and my emotional response to these things are very different. I learned why I think of toire and otearai in this situation, because it is an unnatural situation. Like if you only had someone who says this, then you could think of all these things if you want it, right? Like if someone asked me where the toilet is, toire and otearai, I would know both regardless. Like even if I'm not a native speaker, nor like I'm not going to be a native, like I don't want to be a native speaker, for example. It's not, if it happens, it happens, but I'm not aiming to be a native speaker, nor am I going to be a person who only speaks English. So in this case, both. You can do both. That's kind of the idea. Anyways, I just thought the thing about gaming Bunpro is very much related to how people game Duolingo and then blame Duolingo for not retaining any. Because if you game the system, then yeah, you don't remember anything. It's not like you're focusing on remembering it in the first place.
髪を染めたり巻いたりする。
That's pretty good. Ooh. This one. So Tay form, progressive. Could be 50-50. Maybe?
僕は同僚の男性に対して魅力を感じている。
I thought of kanjiru right away. If it was a sudo verb, like attached with iru and whatnot, that might have been okay. Well, actually, you could get no, you can't. You can't get the other ones. Okay, that one's fine.
僕はあの厳しいコーチが好きではない。
Oh, here's another thing. No, it's not going to make you faster at conversation. Like what I mean is, if you're thinking about this stuff, right? I'm doing this exercise, and someone's like, but isn't that going to slow you down when you're speaking? Yes, it's going to slow you down in speaking. Then your thought is, well, you're not going to speak at the maximum speed that you need for other people to think that you sound good. It's like, I'm not trying to. The idea is I'm trying to speak at the sufficient speed to communicate with someone in a different language than I typically speak. I speak slower English deliberately for other purposes. I can slow down and enunciate my syllables more concisely in order to provide clarity. So it's not about an ideal situation. If you want to speak like a rap god in Japanese, by all means, go ahead. Now, picture how many times people are not going to respond as a rap god to you. Like if you're exchanging rhymes and whatnot, that's your ideal case. So whenever someone worries about like, oh, but if I keep thinking about all these things, what would happen with my speech? Wouldn't I get slower and then people would not understand me and they would think I speak too slow? It's like, then you're speaking to the wrong type of people, at least in my opinion. People who are not encouraging you to unload your things. And if you're wondering, at least in my opinion, if you're wondering, you know, using comprehensible input and all those theories, in my opinion, do not underestimate your ability to selectively groom things. It's far more humanistic, as in the human condition, to groom information than to keep more information with you. So if you're constantly exerting yourself, if you have the time, of course, this is provided you have the time, you're constantly exerting yourself to retaining more information and to using more information. Upon executing that and using it, it will groom itself, because that's our brain isn't in eidetic memory. Like, outside of the lucky few who have eidetic memories, honestly, if you ask those people who have eidetic memories, they probably kind of wish they could forget things sometimes, you know, like trauma and all that other stuff, because you can't forget those things. But to embrace humanity, you know, human condition, one thing to understand is that one natural habit is to groom information. So you don't really necessarily have to practice grooming information. I think that's a really big hot take. The hot take is, if you're already trying to figure out what you can forget and what you don't have to learn, what you don't have to remember, you're already doing something that every human is naturally good at. Like, what I mean is, you're practicing. If you want an exercise in wasting time, in my opinion, it's very hot takey and aggression. Practice forgetting things and practice not wanting to learn things, because that is a hot take. You're wasting your time if your focus is to figure out what you don't need to learn and what you don't need to remember or don't need to do, because you already do that naturally. That's a born instinct of humanity. So if you're wondering why things are getting harder and like it's harder to solve your problems, harder to enjoy things, harder to to pretty much anything is the idea that when you optimize for something, are you optimizing to take in more things, or are you optimizing to avoid more things? If you're optimizing to avoid more things, then yes, you are getting, without a really great word, more and more ignorant every day, because you're practicing the skill that you don't really have to practice. So to me, when someone says, oh, you love Japanese, and then they spend like 4 or 5 hours talking about optimizing how to learn the least amount of Japanese in order to understand native like, that's a battle with yourself, in my opinion. Like, the goal is to learn as much Japanese as humanly possible with the amount of time you have. The moment you say, oh, I'm not going to do this because it's a waste of time, that information is not as important as this information, that's fine. Like, if you do that, know that you will be more and more ignorant over time, because what the skill you practice is to become more and more avoidant of information, and pile that on top of being forgetful, right? The human condition is that your memories consolidate. Unless, again, you're one of those lucky few who your memories never consolidate and you have eidetic memory, that's perfectly fine. Kudos to you guys, right? The 0.01%, maybe even 0.001% that has fully eidetic memories. I don't actually know what the percentage is. But yeah, it's a race. I tell you, NetSpeak. Optimization is optimizing for being ignorant, or progressively more and more ignorant. That was probably the hottest take that I have recently. What?
今年のバレンタインデーは彼氏に下着をあげました。
I think this is gonna be a 50-50, but there is an O there, so it's got a kachi.
取引先から美味しいお菓子をもらいました。
At least I have never heard of ame. Like, you honor, at least at the moment, haven't use an honorific with ame. Although the context of this is pretty, it narrows it down to like a 30%. Ore.
お礼の品を渡す前にありがとうというつもりだ。
Okay. This is a 50-50. Probably. It is an object that has a volume, though.
この小さなカバンには携帯だけが入っている。
So about 40-60. This is a 50-50. It's casual. Oh, but it is talking about the person's boku. Boku no oji-san. Oji-san wa at less, it's like a 30-70. What? Oh.
あの政治家は政治に関わらない方がいい。
この餅は何キロカロリーですか？
This is a kanji test. Mochi is a kanji test, which that left radical is special. That's a very special left radical.
食べたものを吐く。
Haku. I just learned today that haku is the thing that's attached to uso, which is interesting. Well, the ha part, the left character. Interesting enough. That's it.
僕のパートナーも僕のアパートの鍵を持っている。
Oh, dude, I just got kagi, like that kagi in traditional Chinese, and boy howdy, does it look different. They swapped out the entire right radical.
クラスメートに言う。私の肩を触らないでください。
もうすぐでライブが始まります。
50-50? 30, actually 33%.
オレンジは甘くて美味しいです。
This is where I test for katakana and hirakana. Oh.
子供が農家に。トマトの花は黄色いでしょ
Okay.
子供部屋の壁を水色に塗る。
I don't know if there's gonna be a light blue, like, loan phrase or something. Or like the difference between mizuiro and sorairo. Actually, I'm not even sure sorairo kind of sounds like it could be a or it is a thing. I see yoru there, so mata under no yoru gohan. Oh no. Oh yeah. Yoru. Ooh, wait. Yeah, yoru and then gohan right next in. That's kind of misleading. Let's see. We're gonna say
父、
What?
まだ今晩の夜ご飯のメニューを決めていません。
Oh, nanika. Nanika maybe like it already started with nanika. Oh, nanika. Oka? Oh, I forgot the.
何か他に欲しいものはある？
No, sakubu no. Is there a more often used for formal writing? And oh no, wait, that's the person. I don't know.
私の娘は文章を書くのが上手です。
50-50. 50-50. If it's there, that's not a 50-50, like a 70-30.
今月の終わりまでに2キロ痩せるつもりです。
頭が固い父。歌手になるな。弁護士や医者がいい。
Hey. Not bad, not bad. Pretty good. I did mess up the sanfu. What? Sanfujinka. Sanfujinka. Not too bad. All right. That's a wrap for Bunpro. These are short days. Actually, Bunpro's days are kind of getting on the shorter side each time. Oh, well, there's some bootstrapping, but we'll try to squeeze in more of practice things as we go. It's about the midpoint of March. I do want to start perusing and looking at how else I can. These are going to be the month periods, right? So starting in April, we're splitting this, right? April is going to be doing the same. It's going to be the 2-month pace. So N4 grammar, like N4 grammar and vocabulary will be split over 2 months, right? 2 months time. And then the third month, so April, May, and then June will be this type of month again, where then we're trying to work up how we're going to squeeze in different types of practices here and there so we can mix up the output. The output provides a lot of feedback for myself, because self-study also, in my opinion, requires feedback from your output. However, if this is the first time you're self-studying, it may not be clear what the feedbacks are, because largely if it's your first time self-studying, your feedback probably prior comes from someone else. It comes from your mentors, your teachers, and whatnot. So that's kind of where, whenever, in my opinion, a teacher says the best, like, the value of self-study is not great, they're usually referring to people they teach, which are much younger than them. Like if you go to like a high school teacher or something, they would underplay the value of self-study, in my opinion, because it would be natural for them to think that most of the feedback and stuff comes from the teachers, right? They themselves. And that's the environment that they're specialized in. I think that post-teacher, like for example, how do the teachers then improve upon their techniques? Well, they might have mentors and colleagues. That's great. However, if you're someone at the further end of education, typically you will require also a combination of self-study, because there may not actually be individuals who know what you're talking about. What you do is you convene with colleagues and you present your self-study material to that colleague, and you're hoping to integrate, right? Collaborate on that. So that's kind of where we're at here. While all these things are great here, I need to figure out how I'm going to use these tools for my purposes. Yesterday's conjugation thing was where I ranted most of the time. Today was related to how I'm going to use this. We already like kind of messed around, practice our kana a bit. The kana drill is a kana drill. I'm kind of curious, in what way are these two things different? Like how these are presented differently. Anyways, that's a wrap for my Bunpro session today. If you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. As always, feel free to follow along, pick up Bunpro for yourself, give it a go. You're always welcome to come on by, yap as I do, with great interest and enthusiasm, right? More than welcome to share, discuss, bask in each other's mutual achievements, keep each other motivated. So until next time, 皆さんまたね。見てくれてありがとう. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next time. I am gonna stretch, walk around, and kind of take a quick bathroom break, and I will be back for Hansi Hero. Thank you. All right.